for some. Okay, good afternoon, class. Good to see you today. Welcome back to Principles of Microeconomics. This is lesson 6, I believe. Third week, into the third week, we meet twice a week. So we'll wrap up chapter 3 today. So we're on our pace to do a chapter a week, which is my intent, to get through 15 chapters of the book. We'll see how that goes. Okay, this is a new text for us, but it's a great text. I appreciate the publisher and also some other things they're doing for me you don't know anything about, but I think I'll be able to use the PowerPoint again pretty soon, so that always is nice. Okay, your professor, let me just start out with something a little unusual. Your professor is a real human being, right? I'm not virtual. If you come up and poke me, you'll see I'm flesh and bone. Real human being, and as such, I make mistakes. So it's confessional time. So I hope the camera doesn't go off. It's nothing that personal, but I realized last time, I always watch our lecture in the evening. It's replayed in the evening. And so I watch these things, and it's good this has been really good for me to do because all these years of teaching, I have not really had an opportunity to view the lecture to the degree that I have with this class because we're broadcast and so forth. So you learn things. I mean, they'll tell you this in speech class. Watch yourself on video a little bit and you'll see things about yourself you didn't know, and you'll not see things, well, at least you'll do that maybe, but you'll take some corrective action as you see ways to improve. At any rate, beyond that, I really goofed last time. If it were just a matter that I hadn't combed my hair before class, that'd be forgivable. But at the last 5 minutes of class, gosh, and I was very tired last time, so I'll make some excuses. But I had mislabeled a diagram that I drew up here on the document camera. So I was watching this with my wife. We were just kind of eating dinner in the living room. I'm watching RSU TV. And the last 5-6 minutes, I kind of launched out of my chair. I go, I can't believe I mislabeled that diagram. First-year economics student would know better. But that's a good reminder. We all have to be reminded. There's this old saying, pride goeth before a fall. Well, sometimes as professors we think, I don't need to go back and think on these things before I walk into class, but alas, we do. So it was a good reminder to me. All that's a long story to say. I would like to go back and look at the last example we looked at last time, make sure I labeled that correctly so we understand what we're talking about. Your book talks about what are called complex cases with respect to the market. That's the name of the topic as it's posed on page 59 of your text. So that's what we're going to talk about here. This example we ended with the last time, we'll go back and revisit it, but it falls under this topic of complex cases. So if we can go to the document camera, that would be great. And just to mention something or two here before I rework that example, and we'll work some others like it. Okay, so this is page 59 of your text, complex cases. The simple cases are alluded to, and I think I'll be able to use the PowerPoint next time. I'm using the book though today. But the simple cases are here on page 58, where you have a temporary disruption in the market from equilibrium. The market's been at equilibrium where the supply and demand curve cross. You have a temporary disruption that would shift one of the two curves, supply or demand. In the complex case, you have a temporary disruption to both sides of the market that shifts both the supply and the demand, okay? And as we noted last time, there's a multitude of possibilities here because each curve has two different ways to shift. And then when you start comparing the magnitude of the shift on the two curves, that can differ. Either the demand shift or the supply shift can be greater. So at any rate, it gets a little complex. That's why they call these complex cases here. And there's this little diagram here at the bottom. chart, if you will, that tells us what will be the effect of these complex cases where both curves will shift. Even there could be a supply increase and a demand decrease and et cetera. So they go through these various ones here in your text. So you want to be sure and read this. This is all good material. But at any rate, they tell you some things here. Like for instance, if there's an increase in supply and a decrease in the demand. So that would mean that suddenly the market's disturbed by a rightward shift in the supply curve and a leftward shift in the demand curve. And they're going to tell you here what the effects are on equilibrium price and quantity. Okay. Now, what I encourage you to do is always draw a picture. Don't memorize this chart. It's almost like, wow, this is good that they put it in your book, I suppose, but it's much more important that you internalize and assimilate these concepts so that you can picture in your mind what's going on. That's the nice thing, by the way, about microeconomic theory. It really is a nice, one thing that attracted me to it way back many years ago. I was kind of a math guy, but so much of math is visual, really, and microeconomics is this way. So you can visualize what's going on in the market. And you'll see that these two effects attend an increase in supply and decrease in demand. So we have, they tell you, decrease in equilibrium price and indeterminate effect on equilibrium quantity. Well, actually, we can say something more precisely. If we know which effect is greater, is the change in supply greater than the change in demand or vice versa, then we can say something about this, okay? So at any rate, that's what this section's about. And so I posed a problem last time. Let me put it on the document camera here. I apologize. Your professor, and now again, here I'm going to give my excuse, but I think I might have had 3 hours of sleep the night before. On occasion, I wrestle with that. So I know it was the last 5-6 minutes, I think I got shifted to autopilot, and this is terrible. Now, I will just say, as long as I've been doing this, and so I have my PhD in economics, and actually I'm a microeconomist, I have to kind of think when I draw one of these diagrams. I got to say, oh yeah, the supply curve slopes upward, the demand curve slopes downward. And so that's important to remember, and I apparently kind of forgot that last time when I drew this diagram. Here we go, for this problem. So I want to label it correctly today and not say anything more about my mistakes, if I can. So at any rate, here was our example. Forest fires in the West destroy many trees used for lumber. Okay, hurricanes in the Southeast destroy many homes. Okay, and what we want to do is we want to look at the effect of these two things on the market for lumber. Okay, so the market for lumber. So what I would recommend, and I'll just kind of rough this out, is always draw a supply and demand curve, okay, to where the market began initially. And here, I'm sorry, but this is where I wasn't thinking. But I'm going to label it correctly. So you have a supply curve and you have a demand curve. Prices on the vertical axis, quantity on the horizontal axis, right? Okay, so let's take these things one at a time. Forest fires in the West destroy many trees for lumber that are used for lumber. So we're looking at the market for lumber. The market for lumber. Somebody tell me what the effect of those forest fires will be on this market. What curve is going to shift and in what direction? Okay, so you got all these trees that burned up, okay? Now, English is a funny language, right? Some things burn up, some things burn down. So the trees burn up, but your barn would burn down, right? Have you ever wondered about that, or am I the only one? So some things burn up, some things burn down. But I would never hear anyone say those trees burned down. They'd say those trees burned up, wouldn't they? So at any rate, somebody tell me, if you would, if you don't mind, what would be the effect on one of these curves because of number one? Now we're talking about the market for lumber, right? So would there be an increase in the market supply for lumber or decrease? Okay, it would be a decrease, exactly right. Okay, So let me make sure I get it right this time. So let's just say that there would be a left shift in the supply curve like this. Okay, now initially we were here. In fact, that's always good. I was going to do this in two different colors. Alas, if I get back to the PowerPoint, I'll remember to do this. But your initial market, before we jumped in and noted that, here was your market. So your equilibrium was right here at Q1, P1, okay? Right there at Q1, P1. So now we've had a leftward shift in supply, okay? Leftward shift in supply. Number two, hurricanes in the southeast destroy many homes. Okay, so what's going to happen now as a result? This is the market for lumber now. Lumber's used to build homes. So these hurricanes come through, we got to build a bunch of homes, right? So the demand, right, for lumber is going to increase as a result.
And supply potentially decrease.
Okay, that's right. The supply for lumber decreased, exactly right. And the demand for lumber is going to increase. Now there's a couple ways, there's actually two ways I can draw this. And this is why we had that word indeterminate in that chart we were just looking at. Actually, that chart again on page 59 is what we're looking at. Supply decrease, demand increase. I think that's number 2. You come over here and it says indeterminate effect on quantity. Okay, if you can see that. But we know that equilibrium price is going to increase. So we're going to see that. Well, we can say something more precisely if we know which curve shifts the most. So I want to draw it first this way. We're going to have an increase in demand. So demand increases a little bit, but there was a big supply decrease. So what's going on here is that, those forest fires were huge. They burned up half the West. Almost like this year. I hate to say it, it's sad, but my wife and I, we were on our way on vacation this summer, late summer. We were going to go to the Grand Canyon. We get out to Albuquerque, and we heard that the lodge on the North Rim burned. And it burned down. I don't think it burned up. So the lodge, and so they shut the whole North Rim down and shut down for the rest of the year. And so we said, well, we'll go to Colorado instead of going to Arizona. So we did. So at any rate, this happens on occasion. You can have big forest fires. Imagine that would have an adverse effect on the supply of lumber, quite dramatically perhaps. But the hurricanes were not that severe. So now you find the intersection of D2 and S2, which is here. D2 and S2 is here. This was the intersection of S1 and D1. Well, this will locate for you the equilibrium point, or the market equilibrium price and quantity after these two changes have occurred. And this would be P2 and this would be Q2. All right, so there was an increase in equilibrium price, right? The price of lumber at Lowe's is going to go up. But the quantity traded in the marketplace is going to go down. So you're going to go to Lowe's, you're going to see two things. You're a home buyer. You're a home builder. You're going to see two things. One thing, you're going to go, well, those 2x4s, man, they jumped in price. The second thing you're going to note is, man, there's not as many 2x4s as there were. Okay, there's a big decrease in 2x4s, okay, because the quantity here has decreased. Okay, so the supply swamps the degree of demand shift here, so the decrease in, so these curves shifted in opposite directions here. And that is always going to drive the price up. In fact, that'll drive the price up. If supply decreases by less than demand, you'll see the same thing. Let's draw that picture, okay? So again, you start with a market like this. This is S1, and this is D1. See, I paused just a moment to think, so I don't make the same mistake I did last time, which shame on me. Your professor has been doing penance ever since. I can't believe I did that. But at any rate, S1, D1 looks like this, of course, and here's your intersection. Let's go ahead and put that on here just as we did before. This would be Q1. Equilibrium quantity is equilibrium price. P1. So this time, those forest fires didn't burn up quite as much of the West. So I'm going to draw S2 here. Okay. But man, those hurricanes, those were terrible. Okay, so they blew away all the homes in southern Florida. I didn't mean to put that little thing there, I'm sorry. but I want this one here. But you had a big demand shift, big increase in demand because those hurricanes were extremely destructive, but the forest fires weren't that big a deal. So now your market equilibrium's here, okay? Market equilibrium's here. Now what's happened? Again, the price has gone up. Okay, so P2 has gone up. But the quantity traded in the marketplace has also gone up, Q2. Okay, Q2. So in both cases, if you can read I was using graph paper here, maybe I should use blank paper. But in both cases, the price has gone up, right? That's why this says here that if you have a decrease in supply, an increase in demand, there will always be an increase here in the equilibrium price, always, okay? But you got to have a little more information. You got to know about the relative shifts, which is the biggest to say more than the effect on quantity is indeterminate. So here, the effect on quantity depends on which shift is the biggest. And if the supply shift is bigger than the demand shift, there'll be a lumber shortage, as we noted at Lowe's. But looky here, what's going to happen here? A home builder, again, goes to Lowe's. Well, those 2x4s have doubled in price. But there's a bunch of 2x4s. There's more 2x4s than before. Okay? So at any rate, there'll be an increase in quantity traded in this case. Okay? Increase in quantity. So those, I'm going to be careful there because those 2x4s you see are going to get bought. Okay? So it's not like there's a glut of 2x4s. I don't mean to say that at all. I've got to be careful. What I'm saying is the 2x4s in lumber that are traded, this is the market for lumber, the board feet of lumber that gets traded in the marketplace. So those things evaporate off the shelf quite a bit. So you might see in the morning a bunch of them, but they're gone by the end of the day. The point is there's more lumber traded during the course of the short history following these two events than here. Okay? Nobody can get lumber. There's not much traded. Here, there's much more lumber traded here in the marketplace. So suppliers, actually bring a higher quantity than before, though the supply itself has shifted. So at any rate, market equilibrium price and quantity will behave in the way that they tell you here in this diagram on page 59. But what I'd like for you to do, of course, is not memorize this, but rather to be able to draw a diagram like we have here. So I got a couple others for us to think about, okay? Any questions on that? Okay, so let's suppose then this happens here. There is a bumper crop. Everybody know what a bumper crop is? There's a bumper crop of corn in the U.S. You guys are pretty, you know about agriculture and all that. I remember using that term once in class, in a math class, and many of my students didn't know what a bumper crop was. I thought this, but it means there's a whole bunch of whatever. This is a good year for growing corn, right? So there's a bumper crop of corn in the U.S. Additionally, there's been new uses of corn-based ethanol that are approved. So, it could be that, we use ethanol in gasoline. It gets blended with gasoline, and maybe the federal government steps in and says, okay, I think the highest blend I see is like 15%, which personally I don't want to put that in my nice car. But suppose now they say, you can put 20% of your gasoline can be ethanol and so forth, okay? So these two things are going to have some sort of effect on the market for corn, okay? Let's think about what would be the effect on the market for corn. So you just hear supply goes up, demand goes down, quantity and price. And so this is the market for corn. Okay, so first thing, number one, there's a bumper crop of corn in the U.S. Okay, so how's that going to affect this thing right here? So initially, I'm going to call this S1, D1, and let's just go ahead and label this intersections. Make it a little easier for us. This is Q1 and P1. Okay, so bumper crop of corn. So obviously the supply is going to shift, right? Going to shift to the right. So I'm going to draw the supply curve over here. I'm going to call that S2. There's a rightward shift in the supply of corn. But there's also new uses for corn-based ethanol now. So what's going to happen for the demand for corn? Would it go up or down? Okay, yeah, it's going to go up. Now you can draw this either way. And if you're lucky, if it's unusual, the two shifts will be the same, but it could happen. And I think you can reason what would happen there in the intermediate case. But let's just say here that there haven't been too many new uses employed, just a few. So there's a rightward shift in the demand as well as a rightward shift in the supply, but the way I've got it drawn here is the supply effect is bigger than the demand effect. Okay? All right, so the new intersections between D2 and S2, so you got to make sure you put your pencil in the right place. That too is an easy mistake to make. But here's where S2, D2 intersect. So this is the second equilibrium quantity. This is the second equilibrium price. So equilibrium price went down, equilibrium quantity went up. Okay? Equilibrium quantity went up, equilibrium price went down. So ethanol gets traded in the marketplace. There's a market for ethanol. Buyers and sellers come together after these two events. The price per gallon for ethanol is going to be cheaper. It's going to go down. But alas, it's going to be more quantity traded. Okay? Now, they're telling us again this as far as both of these curves increasing, supply and demand increasing. You'll see this in row 3 here of our table. So there's an increase in both. They'll tell you that the equilibrium effect on quantity is that it would increase, but the price is indeterminate. So apparently we'd have to know, a little more information, like in this case here, we know that the supply effect swamps the demand effect. And so that's telling us this, but in all cases, when both curves increase, there'll be an increase in the equilibrium quantity. That's what they're saying. So if we drew this picture differently, both curves shift to the right, okay? There's an increase in supply and an increase in demand. So you just start out here S1, D1, okay? And this time, equilibrium price and quantity, we'll get it here, is such that the rightward shift in the demand curve, D2, is greater than the rightward shift in the supply curve, which would be here, right? S2. So you see what I did? It's like this picture here, but I drew the shift on the demand side of the market greater than on the supply side of the market. This again is the market for corn. Corn, we're talking about corn here. So now S2, D2 intersect here instead of here. I hope that's easy to follow. Okay, so you have to be a little careful here, but S2, D2 intersect here. So this is P2 and this is Q2. Okay? Again, it's easy to get kind of balled up in this. But so, did this move in the same direction here? It did, didn't it? Okay? There's an equilibrium, a greater quantity traded in the marketplace of corn. I said ethanol just a moment ago, but it's corn. It's the market for corn, ultimately. Ethanol's the resource, or is the product, but here we're looking at a resource market. So for corn, so again, the market for corn, there's more corn traded in both cases. More corn is traded in both cases. Of course, you're going to have more ethanol too, because of what they told us here is there's been more uses of corn-based ethanol approved. But notice what happened to equilibrium price this time. It went up instead of down, right? It went up instead of down. Okay, so again, they tell us when there's been an increase in the demand and the supply of corn, this is row 3, the effect on price could be either way, but there will be a positive effect on quantity traded in the marketplace. Okay. So I would want you to be able to reason these out. If we have a little time at the end of the hour, we'll see. I've got a couple others I'll give you a chance to think about. Else I'll put these up for you to consider. Okay, all right. Now, let me just say there's something very special about this point of intersection that we call equilibrium price and quantity, market equilibrium, that is. There's two efficiencies that are going to occur at that point. We noted last time that in any market, and let's think about product markets for a moment, but in really any market, there's a bidding process that will drive prices always either from above or from below to this price we can call PEQ for equilibrium price. This would be equilibrium quantity. This is what happens when you have a free market, a free market. Now we'll look at government interventions in the marketplace in a little bit. But in fact, one such intervention is when the government has a price floor. And if there's a price floor above equilibrium price, it's held artificially high. And what you have is quantity supplied exceeds quantity demanded. We measured these distances last time. So there's a surplus. You can have price ceilings that generate a shortage. But at any rate, there's two types of efficiencies that occur when free markets are permitted to operate. There's two efficiencies, okay? Your book lists these on page 57, I believe. There's something called productive efficiency, okay? Productive efficiency. I want you to be aware of these. We'll be revisiting these later. Your book says that productive efficiencies or productive efficiency relates to the production of a good in the least costly way. Production of the good in the least costly way. All right. Now, your book gives some examples, and these are instructive. This was in chapter 2. We looked at different production techniques where you're combining capital and labor together to produce the product. You might go back and look at that, but I would just say for the moment that in a free market like this, everybody's trying to make the most efficient use of resources to produce products for the product market. And so production efficiency or productive efficiency means we combine the ingredients of production in such a way that we achieve the lowest possible cost in producing that automobile or that table or whatever it is. So first off, there's this thing here. We will be, especially in the next chapter, revisiting these efficiencies. I just want you to know the definitions here and have some understanding now. The second is called allocative efficiency. Two different types of efficiencies. Now, allocative efficiency, that means it has to deal with what we're allocating in the most efficient way. And here what we are doing is we're allocating resources. We're allocating resources in the most efficient way. There's two different ways to harvest rice. This is done around the world. Two different ways of harvesting rice. Okay? In Southeast Asia, they got these rice paddies, not much machinery, all right? So they got a lot of human capital at work, a lot of human beings at work harvesting rice. And they even use water buffaloes and so forth to harvest rice still to this day in certain areas of the world. In the United States, though, if we grow rice, we're not going to do it that way, right? Or if you harvest any agricultural product, you're going to use a big machine. There's different ways of harvesting wheat. After all, you can use a sickle and employ a lot of people to do that, or you can use a combine. Okay, so we tend to use more capital in the U.S. Now, one of those ways uses fewer resources, draws less from the planet. Okay, and we won't get into comparing those two today, but free markets tend to gravitate toward production approaches that utilize inputs in the most effective, most efficient way. So when you're looking at the inputs to production, and how a macroeconomy really would allocate those efficiencies to different things. You're talking about allocative efficiency. Now, a lot of this is driven by demand, okay? All right? We will be talking about this more, but the idea is we look at demand, and demand will determine which goods and services society values the most. So you allocate resources toward producing goods society values the most. So, you know, when I was actually your age in college, I had a really nice car, but I didn't have an 8-track player in it. What an 8-track player. No one wants one today, right? So that's because we have a free market here that drives things toward allocative efficiency. That is, we're producing those goods that society values the most. So we're allocating resources toward goods that people want today. So especially when you start talking about electronic media and so forth, there's been several generations of how we listen to music and so forth today. That's been improvements. So there's no cassette players really anymore, right? I mean, I haven't played a cassette in I don't know how long. It's all downstream now. There's no CDs. It's all downstreaming and so forth. So at any rate, we are devoting resources to things people want. You look at automobiles. You know, sometimes a model will come out like these cyber trucks. You know, I guess they're great, but not everybody wants one of those. So there are signals in the marketplace that dissuade automobile manufacturers from making too many of those. Okay, so they channel or allocate resources toward making other goods and services. So I want you to be just familiar with these two terms, productive efficiency and allocative efficiency, as they're stated on page 50. I think that's page 57. Okay, why don't we work some problems, okay, out of the chapter, just to make sure we can do some of these. Some of these you'll see in the homework. By the way, I want to remind you that on Connect, these problems that I assign on Connect, you have generally, for most of them, maybe not for everyone, but for most of them, you'll have an unlimited number of attempts, okay? So I'm trying to encourage you to do the homework, and it will prepare you for the exams, okay? So you have so keep trying these until you get a good score. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the way I kind of have of encouraging everybody to get into the homework. Okay, so let's look at a few of these. I'm going to jump into an algebraic problem here. So this might be a little scary. And okay, let's see here. Advanced analysis. That sounds kind of spooky perhaps, but we'll think about this just a little bit. Assume that demand for a commodity is represented by the equation P equals 10 minus 2Q. So they're going to give us a demand function here in problem number 6. This is P6 in chapter 3. Demand, they describe it this way. Price is equal to 10 minus 0.2 quantity demanded. Do y'all see that right there? Quantity demanded. Okay? And supply is represented by the equation P equals 2 plus 0.2 QS. This is supply. Okay, so there's your supply and demand curve. And they ask us where Q sub D is quantity demanded, Q sub S is quantity supplied, and P is price. Using the equilibrium condition, the quantity supplied should equal quantity demanded at equilibrium. Solve the equations to determine the equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. Okay? So what they want us to do here is to take these two and find the equilibrium point. Okay? So it's really not that difficult, I think. Here you might already see what to do here is that in this system we're working with, P versus Q, P and Q, you have two curves here. Now these, I want to caution you on something here, just in your thinking. these look like y is a function of x, okay? Because quantity supplied and quantity demanded, or I would just call Q here for the moment, is on the horizontal axis. So this looks like it's a y equals something plus something or minus something x. But remember again, quantity is the dependent variable, price is the independent variable. So there's another way of writing these two equations where you'd have Q in terms of P, and that's usually the way you see the demand and supply equations written. These would be called the inverse supply and demand. That's okay. But we're used to working with this. You have worked with this in the past, okay? You have worked with these equations in the past if you've had something equivalent to college algebra. So let's just think about this a second, okay? Remember algebra. Okay, algebra. Okay, remember this equation, y equals mx plus b? Something like that. That's what we call slope-intercept form for a line. Okay, somebody tell me what this represents. Do you remember? Slope. Okay, we all remember that. How about b? Intercept. Okay, y-intercept in particular. So there's a couple things. If I were to write, say, y equals 2x plus 30. I mean, you could just sketch that right off because you see it's upward sloping. So the rise over the run is 2 over 1. Slope is 30. So kind of roughly speaking, if this is the y-axis, we'd sketch it this way, right? Okay, it's upward sloping. It has a slope of 2 over 1. So if you go plus 1 units here, you're going to go up 2 units. Okay, maybe the two axes are different scales, but that's okay. All right, nice review of algebra, right? Okay, so let's just apply that here. Let's apply that with these two equations here. Y equals mx plus b, demand first off. So there's a slope and there's a vertical intercept for this demand function. This is, you want to think of it in terms of y equals mx plus b. Somebody know what the slope of this line would be? 0.2, okay, you're real close. It's got a negative in front, right? Okay, because we could write this plus a negative 0.2, but you're absolutely right as far as absolute value goes. So you got the slope, and what's the vertical intercept? 10. Okay, so that would be, because this is here. So they got these in opposite order. That, I mean, we could say b plus mx, right? We didn't remember it that way, but here's the vertical intercept, and the slope is a negative 2. So we're going to sketch the demand curve here in a second. This is demand. Okay, y'all with me? That makes sense? That's demand. Okay, now supply. Let's think about supply just a second. When we sketch it, here you go. It's 2 plus 0.2 Q sub S. So M is, in this case, it's 0.2, right? It's the coefficient in front of the independent variable. And B is 2, okay? 2. Now, by the way, there's a difference between these two terms. There's a difference between variables and parameters, okay? The parameters define the curve itself, okay? So the slope and the intercept, they call those, if you care about this, you should, I think, but I don't know if we use it much. But those are called parameters. They define the curve itself. And then the other two are called variables. So this is the independent variable, and that's the dependent variable, and so forth. So at any rate, we can sketch these two curves. I mean, to me, that's important to be able to do in analyzing a problem like this. So, I mean, just kind of a rough sketch here. The demand function here, negative slope, vertical intercept at 10. So you can start up here at 10. This is your price axis. And boom, goes like that, okay? Negative slope. Slope here, M equals negative 0.20. So that means rise over run is 0.2. So, you know, you go down 0.2 units and to the right 1 unit, or down 1 unit to the right 5 units. Okay, it's 1/5, right? Negative 1/5. Now the supply curve has a vertical intercept down here at 2. Okay, could be 2 tons, could be 2,000 tons, something, but something demarked in 2. but it has a slope of 0.2. So it goes up, right? So the M here is 0.2. This is supply and this is demand. Okay, so I mean, those are things you should be able to pull out of this and so forth. Very important, okay, because especially in the next chapter, we're going to be working with these things. I'm kind of preparing you for what we'll be doing, I know is coming in the next chapter, when we start quantifying these different surpluses, is the term we'll use, that attend a free market. And we'll be focusing on this triangle here, and you'll need to be able to describe it a little more precisely than simply drawing it. It helps to be able to know the slopes of these things and so forth, as we did here. But this right here is the market equilibrium, right? So this is QEQ, and this is PEQ. So let's find out what those two are. Okay, so we know the equilibrium price is between 2 and 10, don't we? And we could find out this and so forth. So I want you to be able to sketch it first off, okay? Should be able to sketch it. Second thing is you should be able to algebraically find the equilibrium price and quantity. So, you know, at equilibrium, they tell you that a couple things. They tell you the equilibrium quantity equals the equilibrium quantity demanded equals the equilibrium supply. But also, the price is going to be the same. Okay? So whether I'm on the demand curve or on the supply curve, this point is represented by the same value of P. So probably the easiest way to find this point of intersection between these two curves is to equate the left-hand sides of these two things here. That is to say, the price is going to be the same whether you measure it on the demand curve. So that says 10 minus 0.20 Q sub D is going to equal to 2 plus 0.20 Q sub S. Okay? And the thing is, quantity demanded and quantity supplied are going to be the same. So I'm just going to replace that with a Q for the moment to find out what that is. So I just equate, see, I got a P here, I got a P here. So those two are going to be equal at this equilibrium point. So let's just equate the right-hand sides. Okay? So 10 minus 0.2 Q equals 2 plus 0.20 Q over here. Okay? And so that's just a basic linear equation to solve. You can bring the numbers to the left. 10 minus 2 is 8. And bring this over to the right. 0.40 Q, right? Q. And so Q is 8 divided by 0.40. Does anybody know what 8 divided by 0.40 is? Well, it's 5. It's 20, right? Isn't it 20? 8 divided by 0.4. But again, I don't trust myself today. So put that decimal in the right place. Quantity is 20, whether you're talking supply or demand. So we can go back now and label this. This is 20 units, or 20 tons, or whatever it is. However it is you're measuring Q. That's the quantity that'll be traded in the marketplace. How would we find the price of the good that's traded in the marketplace? What do you think? Any ideas how we could find the price of the good that's traded? And hint is, look at these equations. I can put 20 in either one of these, right? Okay. So I should get the same answer. So whether I put 20 here or 20 here for Q. So I put it in the second equation. 0.2 times 20. That's 4, right? 4 plus 2 is 6. So this number right here would have to be $6. $6 per unit. And this is 20 units. Let me back that off. Okay? $6 per unit, 20 units. Okay? Just basic algebra, right? Just nothing too esoteric there, I think. One thing you'll be asked to do in the next chapter, and I'll just give you an allusion to this now, or a preview of this. You'll be asked to find the areas of these two rectangles, triangles here. Okay? So those are real important when we start talking about the virtues of free markets. That's like a big pizza that's shared between suppliers and demanders. And so we could find the area of the whole triangle or half triangle if we wanted, because if you look at either triangle or this triangle, you know the base. The base is 8 units, right? And you know the height is 20 units. So this is something I'll just tell you right now we'll get into this a little more in the next chapter. But with a free market, when you have free markets, the market is allowed to equilibrate here, supply and demand, at that point. Whereas you've got price controls or something, it's not. But when the market's free, this triangle here is big. When you start putting price floors and price ceilings in the picture, you take out a piece of this pizza that everybody gets to enjoy. But we can see what the size of that pizza is. It's 1/2 base times the height. So I just mentioned that here because you're going to be asked to do that. What's the area of the triangle? Area of the triangle is 1/2 base times the height. And I think you can see that that's 1/2. 1/2. 10 minus $2, if you call this the base, times the height is 20 units. Okay? All right, so this is 1/2 times 8 times 20. And I think that's 80. And that's a number you want to have big. And the units here will be dollars, okay, because the units are going to cancel. If you multiply these two dimensions, you get dollars. And that is a measure, as we're going to see. I'm jumping ahead just a little bit because I need to give you the concept. But that is a measure of total enjoyment in the economy. Let's just say this, it's divided or apportioned to the supply side and the demand side. This is like a big pizza, and the suppliers get to consume this and demanders get to consume this, and they say thank you very much. The government will come in and they'll chop some of that away. But I want to mention that because as we get into chapter 4, you'll need to, if you haven't honed your basic math skills, you'll want to be able to look at some of those questions that we will have in chapter 4. Okay? Any questions? Any questions on that? Okay, I think that's enough for the dock camera for the moment. Okay, so these other questions, okay, and we may go back to it here in a minute, but I just want to give a little summary here. Is we're at the end of chapter 3. I just kind of take a little stroll back through memory lane here. This third week has been focused on chapter 3 because this is so fundamental. But you need to understand, thank you, you need to understand basic market theory before you can go on to looking at something we'll look at in the next chapter called market failure. Okay, market failure and so forth. Lots of other topics that we'll address this semester are built upon the things that we talk about in chapter 3. So, when you do the homework, you will encounter, again, questions related to, just make sure you understand these things. These will be things that you'll be asked to explain on the exam. But the law of demand, you should know the law of demand. Basically, the demand curve slopes downward in that PQ system. Those two variables are indirectly related or inversely related. One goes up, the other goes down. All right, why? So you could be asked that. Why is that? So we looked at three reasons why. So page 47 of your text, we talked about price as an obstacle. We talked about the diminishing marginal utility concept for consumption. We talked about in the income and substitution effect. Should be able to talk about what would shift this demand curve left and right. Okay, so we talked about determinants of demand. Then we look at the supply side of the market. Should be able to tell me kind of what is the law of supply. It's like if price goes up, suppliers bring more to market. Okay. Now why? Just like we asked for why for law of demand, why for law of supply, or why is there demand? I mentioned something there they don't talk about much in this chapter, but they will in the next chapter. We talked about increasing marginal cost of production. Okay. So go back and look at that, but you will confront that again in the next chapter. Now, and then we talked about the market supply, how you obtain that, like a market demand curve, and then the determinants of market supply, what shifts the market supply. Then today we continue with this discussion of complex cases and so forth when you start shifting both of these curves. So you may shift one or shift both curves. That's going to cause the market equilibrium to shift. Now, most of the time, especially when we look forward in this course, when we talk about supply and demand, we're going to be looking at a production context, okay, where you're producing chairs, okay, or ink pens, or automobiles and so forth. And so in that case, it's really helpful to think about this positive relationship between price and quantity on a supply curve as being related to increasing marginal cost of production. But not everything is a production situation. We still want to analyze what's going on with supply and demand. I'll give you an example, okay? The market for land in San Francisco. All right, this is something they discuss on page 70 of your book. It's in the appendix. If we can go there, if you'll take out your appendix and look there at page 70. Anyway, you'll notice there's a vertical supply curve here when we talk about the market for land in San Francisco. I want to mention this for a little bit. We're looking at the market for land in San Francisco. You know what? They quit making it. We don't produce more land in San. Now, there certainly is the world, I guess they can produce more land, like in Holland and so forth. They've reclaimed the ocean, make land. But for the most part, there is a fixed quantity of land in any geographic region, say in the vicinity of San Francisco. So when we talk about the market for land, and I've become aware of this myself, I've been kind of shopping around for some land and realized, man, the price of land keeps going up. There's one thing you can count on, price of land keeps going up. Man, everybody knows because they quit making this stuff, right? So you have a supply curve related to land here, and it looks kind of funny. It's a vertical sloped curve. But we're talking here about a market where on the supply side, we don't really make it anymore. So we're outside of the production context. But what we have is a fixed supply. Okay, whenever you have a fixed supply or demand, you're going to have a vertical supply or demand curve. In this case, you'll notice it doesn't matter what the price is. The quantity supplied is always going to be the same. There are only so many acres in San Francisco. So when they tell this story here in Figure 4 about the market for land in San Francisco, suddenly there's an increase in demand. You can imagine this happening in your hometown. There's a new factory comes to town, okay? A new employer, going to have great jobs. Guess what? People want to move to your town. They want to buy a half acre, an acre, something to build a house on. There's a huge rightward shift in the demand for land. But the quantity of land doesn't change. And what we have a term for this. We say that this is an inelastic, in this case, price inelastic supply of land. Something's inelastic if you can't change it, the length or size of it. You can't change the size of it. So there's only so much land. So if that's the case, notice the supply curve. If there's an inelastic supply, then when you have a rightward shift in the demand curve, it's got to do these two things. It's got to drive up the price, equilibrium price, okay? But then the quantity supplied doesn't change because it's inelastic. So you simply drive up the price. So the price of acreage in San Francisco, because there's a new business going in, will drive up the price. Now, in certain areas of the world, you might have price controls. I just mentioned this a little bit. What if the government stepped in and said, hey, we're not going to let you charge more for acreage this year than last year. So there's what's called a price ceiling on this particular good that's traded. In this case, it's land. If there's a price ceiling in a situation like this with a fixed supply, then when the demand shifts to the right, you have a shortage. The quantity demanded, which is a distance out to the demand curve, exceeds the quantity supplied. Now, that's probably not going to happen with acreage, real estate, that the government comes in and says, you can only charge $5,000 an acre or $10,000. But it could happen with a pharmaceutical, okay? You could have a case where the supply of a very important pharmaceuticals is in a fixed amount, okay? It's very hard to make a certain compound or something like that, and suddenly there's an increase in demand. The government may say, hey, you can only charge so much. That would create a shortage. Or in the case of a national emergency, or say an emergency in a region, hurricane comes through and everybody needs gasoline, okay? The government sometimes, when the government has laws against price gouging, okay? But I'll just say that if there's a fixed supply of gasoline on the market, the government may have ways of preventing the price of that gasoline from seeking its new equilibrium value. That is, the government may step in and say, we're not going to let this market clear, in which case you'd have a shortage. There's another picture of this here in figure 5, the market for tickets at an Olympic women's figure skating finals. So that's a well-attended event at the Winter Olympics. Figure skating, especially the finals. Everybody wants in there to see that, right? Well, it turns out that the tickets are issued at a price are issued at a date well before the event, and generally at a price that they would sell for on the day of the event. So what's happening here is that the price that's printed on the ticket is kind of artificially low, such that there's a greater quantity demanded on the day of the event than is really supplied. And you have this situation with OU football games and so forth. A lot of times it depends on the season. But if, say, your favorite football team, it doesn't have to be University of Oklahoma, though we're under their board, we're an OU kind of school, right? But that demand curve may have shifted to the right during the course of the season because we're winning games. And if you're winning games and you bought your ticket in the early part of the season, guess what? I mean, you can sell your ticket on the day of the game for much more than you paid for it. What do they call that? Scalping, right? Scalping may be legal or illegal. Who knows? Maybe illegal in some context, and I don't know. Does anyone know on game day in Norman if you scalp, is that legal? I think it's legal, but I'm not sure. But I'll have to be careful on that. I can't speak with authority on that. But you can have shortages occur when the market price is not allowed to drift toward equilibrium. Here's another case where for a different event in the Olympics, I want you to read these, okay? These are good examples. But for another case in the Olympics, there is the ticket price is artificially high. This is for the curling finals. You know what curling is in the Winter Olympics. So at any rate, not many people care to watch curling, okay? Not to slam it too much. It's a very popular sport in Canada and so forth, but not in very many places. So the ticket price doesn't really reflect what would be the going rate by the market, such that, you always have a surplus of tickets. In other words, if you had the curling event in the same stadium or arena that you have figure skating in, you'd have a bunch of empty seats. They call that a surplus. You have an excess capacity there of viewership. So extra tickets that could not be sold. Okay, so you have, again, we've looked at this previously, but you have situations where there's a surplus or a shortage anytime the market is not allowed to clear. Remember, you're using that term again. So kind of as a final concept, make sure you drill on this as we get into, as we wrap up chapter 3. Again, supply and demand, supply and demand. The government may come in and not allow the market price to drift toward equilibrium. This is PEQ and QEQ. Okay, one instance of this would be with something called a price floor. Let's look at that just a second. I alluded to it the other day. I'm going to call this PF, or price floor. For a floor to be binding, it has to be set by, say, the government above equilibrium. And this could be the market, say, for milk. Let's just say that for a minute. Now, a lot of your agricultural products have price floors, guaranteed price that the seller will receive. Probably the most famous example or most well-known example in a class like this I could use for a price floor would be in a resource market for labor. They call it the minimum wage. What's the minimum wage? $7 and, is it 15 cents or something? I think it's like $7.15. So, you know, whoever you are, unless you're in one of these categories, I mean, there's certain categories your employer doesn't have to pay the minimum wage, but broadly speaking, if we were looking at not only the market for milk, but let's think about the market for unskilled labor, market for, now I say unskilled because the minimum wage applies only, it doesn't apply to brain surgeons and engineers, but unskilled labor, they're affected. You see, here we're talking about a resource market, and in a resource market you have a price as well. The price is called the wage. Isn't that what sellers receive for what they sell? Hours of their employment. The price is the wage. You still have a quantity here, like you do up here. Quantity of labor, though. So this is probably measured in hours of work or something like that. But at any rate, if for unskilled labor, you know, people who don't really, you know, young people a lot of times, you know, in high school and so forth, don't have much to market, and they want to sweep stores at the grocery store, what have you. They may be able to contribute something at the level of $6 an hour. $6 an hour is what they would sell an hour of their labor for. But the government comes in and tells the employers, you can't hire that person at $6. You have to pay them the minimum wage. I want to say, I forget what it is, $7 and something. I can't believe that. But let's just say it's $7.15. You got the same situation here with that price floor you have up here. I'll call this is a price floor. This is a price floor. In either case, whether you're talking milk, and we can put numbers on that, or if you're talking labor or milk, the quantity supplied exceeds the quantity demanded. And so this would be what? Surplus or shortage? Surplus. Okay, surplus. Very good. So we know what happens when there's a surplus of something on the market, right? Surplus of milk, expect the market price of milk to fall. So again, we've talked about this. Expect the bidding price of, think of a market as being a bidding system between buyers and sellers. Expect that price to go down over time. So price floors create surpluses. Price ceilings. Okay, and you have the same thing here. You have a lot of people who would like to work at $6 an hour but can't. Okay, you have a surplus of labor. And this is where things get political. Just mention here. I mentioned this early on in the course. I just want to allude to it again when we talk about resource markets later in the course. Everyone with two working brain cells in economics knows this is the case. But Democrats and Republicans will differ basically on the wage elasticity of demand for labor. Well, that is to say, they'll differ on the slope, on what the slope of this demand curve is in the market for unskilled labor. See, Democrats will say that, well, I drew the picture, I should have drawn the picture this way, and Republicans will say you should have drawn it this way. And if you think about it a little bit, one will say when you have that wage floor in place above equilibrium, that is to say it's a binding wage floor, if you're a Republican and you think the demand curve is horizontal, that creates a huge surplus of labor. There's lots of people who want to work who can't. That's just the way it is. I'm not taking a side on this. I'm just saying Republicans view the demand curve as being kind of flat. Democrats view that as being kind of steep. And they differ on the size of this surplus. But it exists. In principle, it's there. Okay? No doubt about it. Price. So I want you to know this. Okay? Kind of reviewing here a little bit before we go to chapter 4. Okay? So the other thing is price ceilings. Okay? Price ceiling. These are price floors. By the way, for a floor to be binding, it has to be positioned above equilibrium. If the government had a price floor on labor, that is the minimum wage were $2 an hour, everybody would laugh at that, right? If suddenly the minimum wage were $2 an hour, it would be down here and it wouldn't affect anyone. Same thing for price ceilings. Let's talk about price ceilings. These were floors, okay? Again, this is our topic here, floors, okay? But let's talk about ceilings. Maybe next time I'll be using the PowerPoint again. Maybe I'll be a little easier to follow. I'm sorry here, but you got your book, so this should be pretty easy to think about, I think. Supply and demand. Now you have ceilings. The classic example for price ceilings, no, not the only one, but it is what?
Salary.
Well, yeah, salary. In certain contexts, there could be a ceiling on salaries. That's right. I won't date myself again, but there was a period in our history in the U.S. where we tried wage and price controls. You can look up which president advanced the idea of wage and price controls. We had a lot of inflation going on. If you have a wage control, there you go, as you're mentioning there, you got a ceiling on wages, okay? So someone comes in and says, you can't pay higher than this, okay? And there are lots of instances where we try, there's at least talk in Congress about placing ceilings on wages of people in certain industries, especially in the financial services sector. I'll just say that just a little bit. But the most common example I think we could cite here, where you have a price ceiling, I'm going to call this P sub C, is in low rental apartments. This could be the market for rentals in New York City. Actually, we always say New York City, but this has happened in many, many cities where you might have a 2-bedroom apartment, 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartment. The government comes in and says, hey, landowner or apartment owner, you can only charge $400 a month. Let's just go ahead and put that in here, $400 a month. Whereas the market, if it were allowed to clear, would do so perhaps at $600 a month, okay? Just an example there. So that's going to create what, a shortage or surplus again? Shortage, right? In this case, you have a shortage of apartments. The quantity demanded, which is this distance here, exceeds the quantity supplied. Remember, you always measure this way horizontally. Okay, so what kind of things happen when there's a shortage of apartments in a metropolitan area? Have you ever encountered that, by the way? I mean, you know, do what? No, you haven't. You haven't been in the hunt for an apartment in a city. I have. Okay, my first job was in Washington, D.C. After I got my master's degree, I took a job up there. And so my wife, it's just my wife and I, we didn't need a very big apartment. We had to get on a waiting list to get any kind of decent apartment. Okay, and that was D.C., which is a pretty nice town where we were and so forth. It really wasn't affected so much by price ceilings. But if you are in some areas, New York City in particular, but some of these more congested areas, a lot of people want to live downtown and so forth. You want to make room for people who are low income, then the government, the city government, will have price controls often on rentals. They'll say you can only charge $400 a month. And now what happened here was that you had some, I'll just go ahead and say, you had some bleeding heart liberals who got on the city council, okay? And so they curry favor with the masses by doing this. This is politically popular. You get a lot of votes. You get a lot of people vote for you if you're running for city council and you say, hey, we're going to make the maximum price on an apartment $400, and you'll have a lot of people vote for you. But does this have any negative effects? Well, you bet it does. Okay, if you got not only a shortage, but if there's a shortage, if you think about it, expect some things, expect long waiting lists. So there'll be a first come, first served basis here for, rationing apartments. First come, first served. You might have a price ceiling on gasoline in the wake of a natural disaster. So the government says, hey, you can't charge more than $5 a gallon for gasoline. Okay? So, again, there's different ways of rationing gasoline. You could have first come, first serve. and so forth. But if you might have that in this case, because there's a shortage. If the government comes in and says you can only charge $5 a gallon for gasoline, expect there to be a shortage. Expect the good to be rationed in some way other than letting the market do it by using prices. You might also have just brute force. Only the strong people get the good. With gasoline, it might be that way. And I remember, too, when there were, again, gas shortages in my youth, people actually have fights at the gasoline station, okay, because there was shortages. All right. What else might you have? You might have rationing coupons. The government has to come in and ration. There might be some way of rationing apartments, okay, because of the shortage. But expect disrepair. Okay, disrepair. Now, if you think about low rent apartments in New York City and so forth, these two things kind of go together. The shortage and disrepair. There's a shortage of apartments, and so the landlord, if you go to them and complain about your drippy faucet, the landlord says, well, you know what? Yeah, if you don't like your drippy faucet, and I'm kind of busy right now, I know somebody else who will take your apartment. So you have that going on. You have some apartments that have been held by families multiple generations because of the shortage, so forth. You also have some corruption. Think about this, black markets, in a way. So the city says, you know, people have to get on a waiting list. This is the only way to ensure everybody's equitably treated. You got to get on a waiting list, wait your turn to get that apartment that appears once in a while. Well, I was kind of tempted to do this myself when my wife and I were kind of desperate looking for an apartment in Washington, D.C. Took that job. It's like, you know, I didn't do this, but it's like I wanted to say, you know, could I fork over $100? Would that make this possible with you, or $200? So you have corruption and illegal activity. I did not do that. I'm just saying that whenever you have price ceilings, you're going to have corruption a lot of times. You're going to have black market activity and so forth. So your book talks about how this can occur on page 61 of your text. With rationing coupons, you might have counterfeiting. Okay, that's happened. Counterfeiting. Did I spell it right? So, you know, that's something that would be, you know, not a very good activity that would be unfair to the average consumer. So these are all concepts they talk about here in chapter 3 of your text. And then there's this interesting discussion I just want to mention here about how some of these are enforced. Price floors in particular, going back to price floors, just kind of comparing these two. You have a shortage with ceilings. You have a surplus here with price floors, as we noted. And the government a lot of times has ways of trying to enforce this price floor other than just simply saying, like with the minimum wage, by edict, hey, you will pay this, okay? They tell the labor market, hey, employers, you will, purchases of labor, employers, you will pay this. Now here, when you're talking about a commodity like wheat and so forth, the government, milk and so forth, the government will enforce this one of two ways. Okay, one is they'll just restrict the supply. They'll tell farmers, wheat farmers, that they can grow only so many acres of wheat. Okay? Or milk farmers, you can grow only so much. Or they'll buy up the surplus. The government will come in and buy up. Have you heard of commodity programs and so forth? These are associated with agriculture. So you have commodity milk, and you have other commodity products, and these wind up in public schools and so forth. It's because there's a surplus of these goods, and the only way the government can keep this price up is by purchasing some of this from the dairy farmer and so forth. Okay? Now, it was Henry Wallace, you may have read about him in your history books during the FDR administration, who was the first one. He's Secretary of Agriculture. He actually ran for vice president in the U.S., and he was an exponent of the government coming in telling farmers, hey, you can only grow so much wheat, only so much milk. Any milk you produce over this will just wind up dumping on the ground. And so you look at those old film clips and you'll see a lot of that. Okay, class, hope this is somewhat instructive. I'll see you next time. Please read ahead in chapter 4. Okay.